Happy 2020, everyone. I'm Dara Bunjon, food writer, publicist, food stylist, and as I've said before, a frustrated baker. I'm the Food Enthusiast, and welcome to today's show. Looking down, checking my phone today, I'm just going to try to get it set up so I can get your questions, so don't get upset if you see me looking down. Today's guest is Bruce White. Welcome, Bruce. Bruce is with Perfect Brew Services. He's a coffee expert and aficionado. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you here. Now, Bruce, the main question is, how did you get into coffee? How did that become your passion? Where were you when it started?
So I grew up in Hoboken in New Jersey, where Maxwell House coffee was being roasted, and so I knew the smell of coffee roasting from when I was growing up. And when I was in college, I guess I started drinking coffee, but it was sort of a first wave coffee, just the caffeine. Wasn't about the experience. And then I worked overseas, setting up national parks in Southeast Asia. And early in my stay there was up on the top of a mountain in the rainforest in a clearing.
Is that the Philippines?
It was in the Philippines. And I was working with a tribal community that at the end of a meal, squatting on the ground around a smoky fire, asked if I wanted coffee and got out a jar of Nescafe instant coffee. And I looked around and there were coffee trees growing around, and I asked about that. And they, at first reluctantly, but eventually agreed to make native coffee. And there was cherries were drying in the sun when the small amount of time the sun was out.
That's the coffee bean, they call them, the cherries.
Yeah, the coffee actually is a fruit, and it grows in a red cherry surrounded by a pulp. And what we know as a coffee bean is actually half of the seed that's in the cherry. And they would dry them when the sun would come out briefly in between the clouds, and when the clouds would come back and it would rain, they would roll it up in a banana leaf to keep it dry, and then they'd roll it back out in the sun when the sun came out. So it tended to be a little bit moldy and a little bit damp and musty, but they picked out the driest of the berries and of the cherries and put them in a wok and roasted them on the fire, and then ground them in a large hollowed-out tree mortar and pestle, and made cowboy coffee. And it was this amazing experience of the preparation, the environment,
the
ritual with these tribal people who had very little contact with people from outside. They hunted with bows and arrows and wore a G-string. Carried glowing embers wrapped in a leaf in a little basket on their belt, so they had fire, and so it was just a great experience. And then in the 10 years I was there, people somehow from one island to another, and there's 7,000 islands, people knew that I liked native coffee, so wherever I went they would come out with whatever was growing locally. So I came back home, and the specialty coffee industry was just beginning, and I would go to little coffee shops and got to know the owners. And
that's what they call the second wave.
Well, the second wave of coffee is where there was is where people are drinking coffee for the experience of drinking the coffee, and it's the social experience of being together and talking and telling stories, and that's actually where coffee began historically, was in the cafes in the Middle East. And so I kind of got to be known as somebody who could tinker with your espresso machine and make it work, because there were very few people, if any, around who could fix an espresso machine. And I got to know the manufacturers because I would need to find parts. And from time to time, they would call me and ask me if I was able to go on a service call for them. And I would laugh because at the time I was doing environmental policy and marketing consulting with corporations and government, and so I would laugh, and then
eventually your passion took over.
Eventually, this hobby ran amok, and I got a call one day asking if I could go on a service call, and I was thinking I wanted to do something different and maybe something a little more hands-on again, and so I said sure, and I went to some little scrappy coffee shop in Washington. Coffee was terrible. The people were extremely nice, and I helped fix their machine, kind of MacGyvered it, ordered parts, came back, fixed it, and it was the beginning of this business about 12 or 13 years ago.
So we talked first wave, which was mom and pop having their coffee to get their morning going. The second wave is basically the coffee shops evolving, the Starbucks and things of that nature, and going to cafes. What is the third wave? Is there a third wave?
So what we refer to as third wave is drinking coffee for the experience of the coffee. So it's really about it's more of a connoisseur coffee experience, and so it tends to focus on coffees that of a known origin, so we know not just the country and the farm, but the micro lot that the coffee came from, and it's about the nuance, flavors and aromas of the coffee.
And that has to do with the terroir.
It all has to do with terroir. It has to do with the varietal of the bean, but it also has to do with the elevation it's grown at, and the soils, and it also has to do with how it's cultivated, and from year to year, from season to season, depending upon the weather, the coffee can vary.
Like grapes.
Yeah, like grapes and wine. It's all about terroir, and with the direct trade part of the industry, and this is where a roaster will go and in the beginning it was finding where good coffee could come from and then developing a relationship with the growers, with the producers, and offering to pay them a better price for their coffee if they could produce very good coffee, which incentivized farmers to produce a better quality coffee. A lot of the better coffees we get are produced that way, and the roasters we know who have these kinds of relationships will actually go to the farm and they'll select which micro lot they want based upon the exposure to the sun. The coffee that grows on the north face of the hill will grow a little slower. It'll be a little bit cooler. The sun will hit it a little later in the morning, and the coffee develops a more interesting flavor, and they'll pick that micro lot, and the farmer will keep those beans separate from the rest.
Well, basically, the beans have nuances like wine. You can pick up flavors. You were saying something about if it's lightly roasted, it might be more citric. If it's got a darker roast, it might have a more chocolate flavor to it. But and one of the things you were saying to me is it's all fine and dandy, but it's a chain of where it starts to grow, who handles it, where it ends up. Mostly you're having a lot of micro roasters showing up now. There are places that not only offer the coffee, they roast the coffee. Have you found any, let me switch subjects. We were talking about, I'm going to jump around. We were talking about, how it grows affects the coffee, how it's ground, the water, the minerals in the water. Also, what people have to think about is what you drink your coffee from.
Right. from the tree to the cup. There are a lot of things that can be done that make the coffee better or less better, and you can take an incredible green coffee bean and end up with a terrible coffee experience. And it really depends upon how the pulp is removed from the cherry, how that seed is dried, how it's packaged for export, how it's handled during the export. And then once the roaster gets it, often it goes into storage somewhere, so depending upon how it's stored, and then it comes to the roaster, and the roaster has to handle it properly, and then they have to develop the correct roast. And it's not like toast where you toast it light or medium or dark. It's more like baking, and the challenge of not just bring it to the right temperature at the end, but what happens to the bean along the way, whether you start it with a higher heat and then you lower the heat along the way and you plateau at a certain point, and there's a lot of chemistry and art that goes, science and art that goes into roasting. And so the roasters who are amazing and great are able to take a bean and develop a roast profile that really enhances the natural flavor characteristics in that bean, in contrast to a really dark roasted coffee like often you'll get from like a Starbucks or Pete's, who tend to roast very dark. The roast is the flavor you're tasting in a lot of cases, whereas with a finer bean and a really artisan roaster, they'll roast lighter and roast it in a way that it really enhances those natural flavor characteristics in the bean.
Special nuances.
Yeah, and the nuances. And it's very much like we describe coffees the same way you describe wines and perfumes and a lot of other things that have to do with aromatics and taste, and the same sorts of descriptors and flavor wheels and all of that apply to coffee.
Now, I'm going to say a dirty word, Keurig, those little pods.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that I'm not a coffee drinker, though you have threatened to take me over to the dark side,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to do a cupping. Those little coffee pods, are there any that are any good, or are they all just commodity coffee?
They're terribly convenient that you can pop that little pod in, and if it's not really about the coffee, it's about the caffeine and a hot drink, then it's very convenient, and they come flavored, and but it's not it's apples and oranges to specialty coffee.
Totally different.
Totally different. The coffee's been roasted Lord knows when and ground way back at some point in time, and then put in these capsules, I guess flushed with nitrogen to reduce the effect that you have from oxygen in the beans. But it's not like having a coffee that's a bean that's been harvested this season, that's been prepared and handled correctly, and then roasted, and then allowed to rest a little bit, and then within the first week or two, preparing it as a beverage and experiencing the aromatics and the flavors and all the nuances of that coffee. It's a really different experience.
I remember telling you that since I don't drink coffee, I have coffee in the freezer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been there a number of years. And I serve it to people. They don't seem to dislike it, but I saw the color go out of your face. You never put coffee beans.
Yeah, it's not the best way to keep coffee. The best thing is to have coffee when it's fresh and not to keep it. So
buy it in small lots.
So we bring it in small quantities. People send us coffee, and we try to drink it as quickly as we can, so it doesn't start getting old. You can tell when you're hand pouring coffee. I like the Chemex quite a bit, which is a beautiful way to make coffee. You can tell within the first 5 seconds whether the coffee's fresh. And
just by the aroma?
By the aroma, and also the way when you hit it with the water, whether it starts releasing the gases that are captured in the coffee. You can tell that it's really fresh, and when it isn't so fresh, you can tell. And we tend to up the dose amount of coffee we use to make that cup as it gets a little older, so we can capture a little more of the flavor, but it's not like a freshly roasted coffee. And not every freshly roasted coffee is excellent. And you were mentioning the trend right now toward small roasters. A lot of shops are buying roasters and roasting in their shop and buying green coffee, and some of them are doing fine, and some of them, it's not remarkable, and some of them you'll have one batch from them and it's excellent, and then they'll have the same coffee they've roasted again, and it's not remarkable. So to be really good, you really have to understand the art and science, and use metrics to be consistent in how, once you develop a roast, and maintaining that roast. And then you get a bag of coffee. From the first day you open it and start roasting it, toward a month or so later, when you're roasting the end of it, the beans are changing because they're not quite as fresh, and so you have to learn to adjust the way you're roasting in order to continue to get the best of the coffee. You have to recalibrate it. Yeah. So the people the roasters that we work with, who are consistently really good coffee, that we really enjoy, they're not many.
Right.
But then part of the experience of coffee isn't just what you taste and what you smell. Part of it's the experience. It's the people you're with, the shop you're in, the customer service you get or don't get, and even right down to, you mentioned the cup that you're drinking it from. So you drink amazing coffee out of a paper cup, and it's okay, but you drink it out of a nice heavy porcelain cup that has a nice feel in your hand and touch to your lip, and wider brim, so you get more of the aroma. It contributes to the experience tremendously.
So here in the Baltimore area, you basically cover the DMV, which is Baltimore, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. Yeah. Here in Baltimore, where can people go get that great cup of coffee?
Well, the coffee scene in D.C. is blown up. Everyone's opening multiple shops everywhere. And we've been very busy down there the whole time we've been in business. Baltimore's really just beginning to take off, and so there are lots of small shops and many small roasters that are opening up. We had a holiday open house a few weeks ago, and invited a lot of the roasters that we work with to come in and bring coffee and share their experience. We had some of the manufacturers of machines that we work with there, and so we had some beautiful equipment in the shop.
I was lucky to be there.
Yeah.
I have a question that's come in from Jeffrey Spear.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite liquor to pair with coffee?
I haven't played around with liquor and coffee. It's something I have an interest in doing sometime, and it's on my list. Yeah.
That's great. So I think you had mentioned earlier some of the places here in Baltimore. You were saying Zeke's.
Well, Zeke's is very well known in Baltimore. They're at the farmers markets, and they have a huge following. We do work with them, and they're great people, and people love their coffee. And then there's another small roaster, much younger, called Vent. They're based down, roast and serve coffee down at the Union, where Union Brewery is, and they're great, and they're just trying to get themselves established. And
you said there's a new one coming to Hamden?
There's a new shop coming to Hamden, and don't recall the name of it.
Well, keep your
terrible.
eyes. Bruce will keep us in the loop, and we'll let you know a little bit later on about that.
Yep. It's going to be a home store with beautiful things for the tabletop and furnishings and things, and they're putting coffee in there, and they're going to be curating just really interesting coffee from different roasters in different parts of the world, as well as some of the local.
I take
coffee.
it your equipment's going to be in there?
We're working with them on their equipment, and they're getting some really nice equipment, and we're customizing some of it, and I can't remember their name, but
well, that's okay.
Maybe we can put it up in comments.
We'll work it out.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
We work with one of the roasters that was with us was at our open house was Small Plains, which is based in D.C., and the owner's been in the business for years, has coffee shops in D.C. and started roasting a few years ago, and they're using his coffee at Artifact.
Oh, okay.
Here in the neighborhood, so
right, just
if you
around
want
the corner.
That coffee, it's very good, and they're the nicest people.
And you were talking about Patango.
Patango has a cafe and bakery down at Fells Point, and we work with them in all their locations, and they're doing a really good job. They're serious about how they make their coffee, because not just getting good coffee isn't the whole thing. You have to be serious about how you prepare it and how you serve it, and they do a great job. There's a company called Dignity that is organized a group of farmers and small farmers in Colombia, and they're actually doing the roasting in Colombia and then bringing the coffee up here roasted. They have a deal with FedEx that makes it possible to bring it in at a good cost. And they're trying to bring more of the profits back to the farmers who in the coffee industry are grossly undercompensated for what they do and the amount of work they do. And their coffee is actually quite good. Generally, the people who roast overseas and bring the coffee in roasted tends not to be excellent, whereas this coffee is really good. And they're based in Virginia, and I think we'll see them in Baltimore eventually. Their coffee is very good. We also had there's another small roaster here in Baltimore called Black Acres, and they're running some pop-ups and just getting themselves known, and other really nice people with quite excellent coffee. And then at our open house we had Intelligentsia, who's one of the old original direct trade artisan roasters that's grown quite large and was bought by a multinational, and now they're part of a much bigger organization, but they've still maintained their quality, and we really enjoy working with them. Yeah. So we like working with the small guys mostly. Lost Socks in D.C. was with us. Was one of the coffees that you didn't get to try because you didn't drink coffee.
No, but you're going to bring me in for a cupping.
Their coffee is really good. We're going to plan a cupping and introduce you to some of the coffees that are not about the caffeine, but really about the nuances and flavors.
Over the years, I mean, what you're talking about, you've been crazy busy. Your daughter, Shan, is in the business as well, and I thought it was interesting. She used to be a coffee trader down in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Everything is booming for you, and it's growing. And you said that there's an opportunity for the right person for an operations manager.
Well, we started out as a boutique business, and so it was really just me, and I had worked my whole life as a consultant, and so I like the connection I had with shop owners and it being about
fixing and
me being the one who comes in and helps them. And we get busier and busier. I brought in a sidekick, trained him, and there kept coming more and more work, and we've been adding capacity, and we're now at that point where, and then Shan would go with me to the trade association annual expos, and we got known as this father-daughter team. And the coffee industry is interesting. A lot of it's, especially with the Italian equipment for espresso, they all tend to be family businesses, and it's all about these historic relationships and between families and family members. The distributors here are often relatives, typically relatives of the family that owns the company that manufactures the equipment.
Right.
And so, and the Americans who've gotten involved are often related to the manufacturers. And so people really like the fact that we were father and daughter. And Shan worked with me when she was in high school and in and out of college. And then she got this job as a coffee trader in New Orleans. So she knows a lot about the commodity side of the industry as well as the specialty side.
Well, we're going to put it out there. If we're looking for a chief operating manager for Perfect Brew Services, so you can reach us or him, Bruce, and contact them. And before I forget, this is Perfect Brew Services, and it's perfectbrewservices.com. And right now they're servicing the DMV, and please reach out to him. And before I close, locally I wanted to note, I had just got this in before I came in, just down the road here in where we're located on Clipper Mill, the True Chesapeake Oyster Company is now starting to do music on Friday nights from 9 to 11 p.m. So I want to give a shout out. It looks like their first groups they're going to have is more country oriented, and I think it will be diverse, but do check that out. And I also wanted to talk about one of our favorites in Pikesville, Edmart Delicatessen, is in the process of being sold, and the owners are shutting down for a time being until it is sold. And the full story, if you want to read it, is on jmoreliving.com, and this beautiful article on there. And we're going to wrap up right now. So next week, join us. It will be the chef from the Milton Inn, chef owner, Brian Boston. And we'll be talking restaurant weeks. We're going to be on the edge of Baltimore City Restaurant Weeks, Baltimore County Restaurant Weeks, and what's new out at the Milton Inn. You can reach me at food@jmoreliving.com. And of course, this interview will be on Facebook, the J Moore page, the J Moore webpage, and also the Food Enthusiast on YouTube. So feel free to check it out. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the Food Enthusiast. Thank you for checking in with us. May your plates always remain full.